The IoTSF best practice guides are currently a set of 11 one-page documents. The primary intended readership of these guides are the designers and developers at device manufacturers. However, the guides can be informative to many other roles, including project managers, test managers, IoT service providers, retailers and end consumers, where end consumers may be commercial or domestic users. The aim of each guide is to act as an aid memoir and signpost for the reader, to inform them of key security topics they must address in order to produce secure, trustworthy, professional products. Initially, the focus of these guides was the consumer market. However, this past year, we've opened up our remit to cover potentially any area of the IoT marketplace. Each guide looks at a single security topic and identifies the top 10 or so key issues that need to be addressed by the reader. When securing an IoT device, or to that matter, any other IT deployment, there are a number of security aspects that have to be addressed in order to protect that installation. So as we see on the slides here, we've got a number of key areas that we need to secure. The first one is understanding the data. Now, this is the whole raison d'etre of why the system's here, is about processing the data. So you need to know what makes up that data. It could be some intellectual property of the company that's in there that you need to keep safe. It could be some personally identifiable information. And in particular, depending on in what country that data is being processed or stored or being sent to, can impact what you do with that data. So therefore, you need to be able to understand what that data is. Secondly, you need to physically secure the installation. Now, it's no good putting your server outside the back door because that's where you've got some space. You need to think about keeping that server, or whatever it is, physically secure. Then you need to secure all the software. This is one of the very most well-known security areas. All the operating system and the applications all need to be hardened. And then you need to manage who gets on the system. Now, every day you manage who gets into your house, and it's exactly the same thing here with your device. It's all about managing who gets on it and who doesn't. Then we need to connect to the network securely, because you can do all this good stuff on the device, but if as soon as you connect to the network, data leaks out left, right and centre, so we have to address that. Also, we need to implement and manage effectively software updates. We all know software updates should be done, but there are ways and means of doing it correctly. And then finally, we need to keep track of what's happening on the system. It's no good running a system completely blind. You need to know what's happening with it. So, what we see on this slide is a table, and I've got all those points I previously mentioned down the left-hand side, and then down the right-hand side is a list of our guides that complement those. So, going down the list, the first one, understanding the data. So we've got Guide A, classification of data. So what this is about is giving you information on how to think about classifying your data in the scenario it's being used, making some decisions, labelling the data, and then applying appropriate mitigations that are appropriate to the particular classification of data that you have. Then for physically securing the installation, we have Guide B, which, as it says, physical security. Then securing all the software. So we have, first of all, Guide C, which is about device secure boot. So you need to boot your device securely, and only then can you think about trusting anything that sits upon that booted device. So that's what's covered in Guide C. Then in Guide D, we've got securing the operating system. So again, this is doing hardening, well-established best practice processes on hardening an operating system. And then Guide E is about hardening the applications that sit on top of that. Right. Moving on, we then have managing who gets on the system. Well, that's covered pretty much by Guide F, which is credential management, and wrapped in with that, of course, is encryption, which is in Guide G. Connecting to the network securely is covered by Guide H, network connections, making sure that the data goes out in a secure fashion, and again, that's tied in with Guide G, encryption. Then moving on to implementing and managing software updates. In fact, we have two guides for that. The first one is J, securing software updates. So this is very much a technical look at how you technically make software updates secure. And then associated with that is Guide J, which is software update policy. This is more talking about your procedural approach to this, or the how, what, why, where, and when you would do a software update. You don't just fire out updates willy-nilly. You've got to have an established process of how, why, where, and when you do it. So let's have a look at a complete guide, just one single guide. And the example we have here is Guide K, logging, but this could relate to any of them. We'll go into it in a bit more detail in a minute, but just at a high level, what this is a single one-page guide with lots of white space on it. What we didn't want to do was write a big, thick guide that no one's ever going to read because there's too much in there. We wanted a single one-pager that's really easy, just pick up and read, and that's what we have here. So we have an opening paragraph at the top that gives a bit of context, a series of one-line or two-line statements about you need to do this and you need to do that. Then we provide some links to further information, and we'll come on to those in a minute. So a guide is really, it's like a shopping list. If you go to the shops with a shopping list, the shopping list doesn't say necessarily you need to go to this shop and this is how you cook the food. All it says is buy this, buy that, buy that. And that's what these guides are doing. They're simply saying do this, do that, do that. So it's an aid memoir and a signpost. So let's take a look at the upper half of Guide K, in this case is the example. First of all, the letter K. It's purely a handy reference that doesn't imply any specific order or anything. It's simply a handy reference to say Guide K, in this case logging. And then you'll see at the top there, there's an opening paragraph that just gives a bit of context and background to what we're talking about. And then we see the start of these one-liner statements. We have spent a lot of time very carefully choosing the wording that goes in here. We've tried to make it very specific, very precise, and very concise. That way we just get the message across without the reader having to read a whole load. So if we now look at the lower half of the guide, so we see a continuation here of the one-line statements, and then just as you get to the bottom of the one-line statements, it then says underneath something to the effect of further information about logging, or whatever the topic is available here. So if you have the electronic copy of this, you can click the link and it will take you to the website where there is further supplementary information. Now, the reason we've done this is, as I said, we're trying to make this document short, sweet and concise. So you can't put in a lot of description, you just make your statement you want to make. But not everyone knows about all of this, so by giving the link to the website, we can then send them across to where there's a discussion document that talks a lot more about this subject in greater depth and gives some context and reasoning behind why the reader has to follow what's being given here in the guide. And then below that, there's then some links at the bottom of the slide. We've got one here for NIST and a link to OWASP, and another one for creating secure Unix logging system. So these are resources that we found online that we feel demonstrate good industry practice from trusted sources. We expect the information to be staying online for some considerable time, and we feel it adds real value to the reader, to give them more background information on why and how they need to do this. So we're not telling people how to do these things, we're simply saying you need to do them, and here's where you can go to find out more. So that's about it in terms of the actual guides themselves. Just a couple more points to cover here. First of all, we saw Chris earlier, he was talking to you about the compliance framework. And in that compliance framework, there's several sections like business processes and device assurance. And at the top of each of those sections, as shown in this slide, there's a little mini paragraph there, which basically says, in this section, parts of it you'll find covered by a best practice guide, and it lists what the guides are. And that's what I've highlighted in yellow on the slides. And then I would like to briefly come on to the government's Department for Digital Culture, Media and Sport Code of Practice for IoT security. Now, the DCMS brought this out in October, and it provides 13 points of good security practice for IoT security in the consumer environment. So what we did was we said, right, what best practice guides do we have that cover the topics brought out in this document? And on our slide here, on the left is the document from the DCMS, and on the right is the table that maps between the DCMS topics and the best practice guides. You probably can't see them on the slide here, but that table is in with our document pack. So you'll be able to straight away, if you're going through the code of practice document from the DCMS, you'll be able to straight away say, in the best practice guides, they cover this aspect here. So we thought that would be helpful for some people. So finally, on our last slide, I'd just like to say on the left there in the table, that gives the full list of everything that's in the best practice guide pack. The best practice guide can be downloaded from the IoT Security Foundation, the link's on the site there. And then one final note, I would like to really thank members of the Working Group 2 team. It's a very small number of people who have put in an awful lot of very hard work working with me to help us produce these documents, and they've done a fine job. And also thank you to the many reviewers who have looked at them as well. Thank you.